The house smelled of cinnamon, butter, and regret. I had been up since dawn, basting the turkey, rolling out pie crusts, and forcing my hands to stay busy so my mind wouldn't wander. Yet even with the clatter of dishes and the chatter of relatives filtering in, my heart pounded with a rhythm I couldn't silence. Thanksgiving in our little town of Willowbend had always been a noisy, warm affair, neighbors dropping off cranberry relish, kids running wild in the backyard, someone tuning the old radio to a crackly country station. But this year was different. This year, my son was home from Boston, sharper-eyed than ever, and I feared what he might notice. I first saw Nathan in the reflection of the kitchen window, his tall frame blocking the autumn light, his smile cautious but sincere. "Mom," he said, setting down his bag, "smells amazing." I kissed his cheek, breathing in the faint trace of city air clinging to his coat. My boy, now a man, home to eat and, unwittingly, perhaps to unearth the truth I'd buried for 2 decades. I told myself it would be fine. Just dinner, just laughter, just pretending. But when Abram walked in, the neighbor who'd been my secret for 20 years, the man whose presence once rewrote the script of my marriage, my stomach dropped like an iron skillet. He carried a pie, his flannel shirt dusted with flour, and greeted everyone with his easy charm. Only Nathan's eyes lingered on him a beat too long, curious, almost suspicious. The table groaned under the weight of food. We passed the sweet potatoes, the rolls, the gravy boat that had belonged to my grandmother. Conversation buzzed about the election, about the new Walmart that threatened to put old shops out of business, about who was moving away and who had just died. But I could feel Nathan studying me, catching the way my hand trembled when Abram asked if the turkey needed carving. How I answered too quickly, too brightly, "No, no, I've got it." The knife glinted under the chandelier. My pulse quickened. For years I had lived in careful silence. The affair folded neatly into the fabric of daily life, hidden among PTA meetings, church potlucks, and quiet midnight walks. But silence has weight, and sooner or later, someone is bound to hear it creak. When Nathan leaned across the table and asked, almost casually, "Mom, how long have you and Mr. Abram been friends?" the fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto the plate. The room went still, the only sound the hiss of the radiator and the faint buzz of the radio in the kitchen. Abram's gaze dropped to his lap, and my husband, William, stiffened but said nothing. In that frozen moment, as cranberry sauce bled into mashed potatoes, I knew Thanksgiving would never be the same again. I didn't answer right away. My son's question hovered above the table like smoke that refused to dissipate. Everyone pretended to keep chewing, but no one really did. Even the old mantel clock, which usually ticked with comforting steadiness, seemed to have paused in judgment. "Friends?" I repeated, forcing a laugh that cracked like thin ice. "Nathan, what kind of question is that?" But his eyes, the same dark, piercing ones he'd inherited from his father, didn't waver. He'd grown into the sort of man who hated half-truths, who sniffed them out with a patience that was both admirable and terrifying. I had once admired that trait in him, the way he demanded clarity, never content with polite nods or evasive smiles. Now, I feared it. Abram shifted in his seat, pushing his pie toward the center as though offering it up as a distraction. William finally broke his silence with a gruff, "Eat your dinner." His fork stabbed into the turkey breast with such force that the knife beside him rattled against the china. Nathan's voice was calm, too calm. It's just, every time I've come home these past few years, Abram's here. Not just Thanksgiving, but 4th of July, even Easter Sunday once. Always bringing pies. Always staying late. And you too. His gaze moved from me to Abram and back again. You laugh at things no one else hears. You look at each other like there's some old joke the rest of us don't get. I wanted to tell him he was imagining it. That small towns breed familiarity, that laughter doesn't always hide sin. But the truth, bitter and unrelenting, pulsed at my temples. I remembered the first time Abram brushed my hand at the church bazaar in '92. How the touch lingered longer than it should have. How it lit something in me that had been dim for years. I reached for my wineglass, my hand shaking so badly the liquid trembled inside. Abram and I have known each other since high school, I said carefully. That's all. Old friends, that's all. But Nathan leaned back, folded his arms, and studied me with a look I recognized too well, the same look I used to give him when he lied about finishing his homework. The rest of the meal dragged. Conversation stuttered and limped, never regaining its earlier ease. The football game played on the TV in the living room, muffled cheers punctuating the silence. Plates were cleared, pies cut, coffee poured. Yet Nathan's question lingered in every pause, in every sideways glance. Later, when the others had drifted to the porch for cigars or slumped in front of the TV, Nathan found me in the kitchen, scraping cranberry-stained plates into the sink. He closed the door softly behind him. "Mom," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "Please don't lie to me." The faucet hissed as I turned it on, scalding water rising with steam. My reflection wavered on the window pane, blurred and ghostly. For a moment, I imagined myself telling him everything, the nights Abram and I had walked by the river under harvest moons, the letters we burned, the promises whispered into the folds of quilts. I imagined the relief, the weight rolling off my chest. But then I saw his face, my son, grown but still my boy. The man who believed in honor because I had raised him to. And I couldn't bear to crush that belief with the truth of who I really was. So I kept scrubbing the plates until my knuckles burned, and said, "Some things, Nathan, you don't need to know." His silence behind me was heavier than any accusation. The night deepened, carrying the scent of roasted turkey and pine smoke from the fireplace into every corner of the house. Nathan had retreated to the guest room, but I could still feel his presence like a shadow stretching across the hall. Abram had left early, ostensibly to check on his own family. Though I knew the truth, we both needed space to breathe without prying eyes. And William sat in his chair by the window, staring out at the darkened yard, silent as if he, too, sensed the invisible fissure running through the evening. I tried to lose myself in dishes, in wiping down counters, in stacking silverware. But the past had a way of whispering louder than the present. I remembered the first Thanksgiving Abram had spent in our home, decades ago. The way he'd arrived with a pumpkin pie I hadn't asked for, the shy smile, the casual brush of his hand when I helped him hang his coat. Back then, the world had seemed smaller, kinder, and more forgiving. We had stolen glances across crowded rooms, laughed at private jokes, whispered in corners nobody noticed. It had been thrilling, intoxicating, but it had also been dangerous. Now, years later, with Nathan grown and watching, the thrill felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My choices, once hidden behind mundane routines and polite smiles, were exposed under his gaze. Whether I admitted them or not, I wanted to tell him, to unburden myself. To explain that my love for William never dimmed. That my affair was a complicated thread in the tapestry of my life. Not a betrayal I had ever wanted him to witness. But the words lodged in my throat like stones. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the kitchen door. Nathan's voice, hesitant and wary, filled the space. "Can we talk?" I set down the sponge, dried my hands, and faced him. The lines around his eyes were more pronounced than I remembered. A mixture of judgment and concern. He was no longer the boy who believed in fairy tales and unquestionable truths he had inherited. My own ability to dissect the world with precision. "I just don't understand," he said quietly. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did it have to be secrets, all these years?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. "Nathan, life is messy. People make choices that aren't always perfect, that hurt themselves as much as others. I thought I was protecting you, keeping things stable. I didn't want to ruin the family." He shook his head slowly, frustration and hurt mingling on his face. "You think I'm naive? You think I wouldn't see? Mom, I've seen. And now everything's changed." I could feel my heart splintering under the honesty of his words. The comfortable illusion of our home, the carefully maintained facade of our family life, had cracked in an instant. I had believed that silence was protection. That omission was kindness. But in reality, it had been a cage, for him, for me, for all of us. We stood in silence for a long moment. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint wind outside the only sounds. Finally, I said, "I don't know how to fix this, Nathan. I wish I did. I wish things were simpler, like they used to be." He exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry years of disappointment. "I don't know either," he admitted. "But I need you to be honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more pretending." And for the first time that night, I nodded. Not because I had all the answers, but because I knew some truths, no matter how painful, had to be faced. The aftermath of my choices would linger, shaping the rest of our lives in ways none of us could yet see, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for some fragile reconciliation. As he left the kitchen, the soft click of the door felt like a threshold, crossing into a new, uncertain chapter, where nothing would ever be the same again. The house, once filled with the comforting aromas of Thanksgiving, now carried the scent of revelation, regret, and the tentative hope of understanding. The morning after Thanksgiving brought a brittle chill. The kind that stings the skin and makes the breath visible in pale clouds. I woke before the sun, the silence of the house pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. Nathan had retreated to his childhood room, leaving behind a note, "We'll talk later." I hadn't touched it yet, I wasn't ready. Instead, I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and wandered to the kitchen. Seeking the comfort of routine, coffee brewing, the faint hiss of the kettle, the smell of toasted bread. But comfort was elusive. My mind replayed last night's confrontation in a relentless loop. Nathan's voice, calm but piercing, echoed, "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did it have to be secrets?" The guilt twisted in me, coiling tighter with each thought. For decades, I had justified my affair as a quiet rebellion. A sliver of escape in a life constrained by small-town expectations and the weight of family duty. Yet now, under my son's scrutiny, the carefully constructed walls of secrecy crumbled. Abram's absence weighed heavily too. He hadn't called, hadn't texted. Usually, we would have exchanged a few casual words by now. A reassurance that the world had not ended. But this was no ordinary morning. The affair, once hidden in shadowed corners, had been illuminated. The thought of seeing him again, of facing his gentle eyes while knowing Nathan's had already witnessed the truth, made my hands tremble. When Nathan finally came down, he moved with a quiet purpose, carrying himself like a man who had already measured the chasm between us. He poured himself coffee without asking, his eyes avoiding mine at first. I tried to offer a smile, but it faltered. The kitchen seemed too bright, the sunlight harsh, as though exposing every flaw, every misstep. "I've been thinking," he began, finally looking at me, "about all the times I came home and felt something was off. Little things. You laughing too long at Abram's jokes. The way you and he would disappear for errands I wasn't allowed to join. I thought I was imagining it, but I wasn't." His voice wavered slightly. "I just needed to hear it from you." I nodded, feeling the ache of years condensed into that moment. "Nathan, I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you, keeping our family together. I thought silence was better than truth." He shook his head slowly, the weight of understanding mingling with anger. "Silence isn't protection. It's betrayal. You made choices for yourself, and I get that. But you made them without me. That's the part one can't forgive so easily." We sat in strained quiet, the coffee steaming between us like a fragile bridge, half formed, waiting to be crossed. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, a reminder that life in Willowbend moved on whether we were ready or not. I realized that the conversation we were having was not about blame, but about recognition, the acknowledgement that our family, our memories, our shared history had been irrevocably altered. By the time the rest of the household stirred, bringing with them the clatter of plates and laughter, Nathan and I had said little more. But beneath the quiet, a tentative understanding had begun to take root, that honesty, painful as it might be, was the only path forward. Abram would return later that afternoon, and William would eventually leave for his habitual morning walk. But the real work, the reckoning, had begun between my son and me. I looked out the kitchen window, at the frost-tipped grass and the faint smoke curling from the chimneys of neighboring houses. Thanksgiving had passed, leaving behind more than empty plates and lingering aromas. It had left questions, fractures, and the undeniable truth that some secrets, once revealed, change everything. And now, standing in the quiet of that cold morning, I understood. Life would not return to the way it was. It had shifted, subtly but irreversibly, and the real challenge lay ahead, facing the aftermath, together or apart. By mid-afternoon, the house had begun to regain a semblance of its usual rhythm, though the tension lingered like a stubborn fog. Nathan had gone for a walk, presumably to clear his mind and perhaps gather the composure he needed to confront the rest of the family. William, having returned from his morning stroll, had taken to the porch with a newspaper, the rustle of pages masking the unease that neither of us dared acknowledge directly. I lingered in the living room, pretending to arrange magazines on the coffee table, though my hands shook with every adjustment. Abram returned quietly, carrying a small bag of groceries from the local market. He set them on the counter with careful deliberation, each movement deliberate, as though he were tiptoeing through a minefield. "Coffee?" he asked softly, his eyes meeting mine for the briefest of moments before flitting away. I nodded, wordless, heart-hammering. We moved through the motions of normalcy, pouring coffee, unpacking vegetables, adjusting curtains, but the air was thick with unspoken truths. Abram's presence, once a source of warmth and secret delight, now felt like a weight pressing down on the fragile equilibrium of our home. I could see it in the way he avoided Nathan's room. The way he lingered near the kitchen doorway, waiting for permission to speak. And then Nathan returned. His steps were measured, deliberate. A cadence that suggested he had been rehearsing his confrontation all along. He entered the living room with a calmness that belied the storm I sensed simmering beneath his composed exterior. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but edged with steel. I gestured for him to sit, and he complied, placing his hands on his knees. The same posture he had adopted as a child when preparing for one of our serious discussions. Abram lingered in the background, a quiet observer. His presence simultaneously comforting and painful. Nathan's gaze shifted between us, sharp, unyielding. "I need to understand, Mom. Why did it go on for so long? Why did you risk so much, knowing it could destroy everything?" I exhaled, the words catching in my throat. "It wasn't about destruction, Nathan. It was complicated. Abram and there's a history there. It wasn't easy for anyone, least of all me. I never wanted to hurt your father, and I never wanted to hurt you." He shook his head slowly, his jaw tight. "But you did. And you did it for yourself. For some illusion of happiness." His eyes flicked to Abram, then back to me. "I just need the truth, all of it. No more hiding." The house seemed to hold its breath. I wanted to tell him everything, the stolen moments by the river. The letters I burned in the fireplace, the whispered promises that spanned decades. But the full confession, I knew, could fracture our family beyond repair. Yet withholding it felt like another betrayal, heavier each time I considered it. "I'll tell you what I can," I said finally, voice trembling. "Some things are too painful to recount in detail. But yes, it went on for years. It was a mistake, a love, a regret. I don't know how to categorize it anymore. All I know is that I never stopped loving your father, and I never stopped caring for you." Nathan's expression softened slightly, though the hurt remained etched in his features. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," he admitted, "but I need to know the truth. That's the first step." Abram stepped forward then, cautiously, offering a tentative hand. "Nathan, I never wanted to come between your family. Nathan held up his hand, halting him. "Not now. I need to hear from her first." The room was silent but charged, a fragile tension strung taut between us. I realized that the path ahead would be slow, fraught with difficult conversations and lingering resentment. But for the first time, I also sensed the possibility of some reconciliation, a way forward that didn't erase the past, but acknowledged it fully, painfully, and honestly. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden streaks across the room. The warmth it brought felt ironic against the cold truth now settled among us. Thanksgiving, once a symbol of family togetherness and simple joys, had become the catalyst for revelation, forcing us to confront the consequences of choices made long ago. And as I watched Nathan's contemplative profile, I understood that our lives would never return to the seamless harmony of before. Instead, they would unfold in a new, uncertain pattern, one shaped by honesty, confrontation, and the slow, fragile work of forgiveness. Evening fell over Willowbend like a soft, gray blanket, the kind that muffles sound and distorts perception. Shadows crept along the walls, elongating the furniture and making every corner seem heavier with memory. The day had dragged on, each hour layered with quiet tension, awkward silences, and careful navigation around conversations we could no longer avoid. Nathan had returned from another walk, his pace slower this time, his expression guarded but less stormy. Abram remained nearby, lingering in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact but offering small gestures of civility, a cup of tea, a polite nod. I found myself alone for a moment, wandering the empty hallways. Each photograph on the walls, our family, framed vacations. My son as a boy, felt like an accusation. Memories once comforting now carried the sting of hidden truths. I paused in front of a picture of Nathan at 6. Grinning with chocolate smeared across his cheeks, oblivious to the world's complexities. My chest tightened. How could I have carried this secret all these years and still called myself a mother? Nathan approached quietly, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. He stopped beside me, looking at the same photograph. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I've been thinking about what you said today. About protecting me. About keeping the family together." He paused, struggling to find words. "I understand why you thought you were doing the right thing, but, don't you see? The truth would have been better, even if it hurt. At least then, I could have made sense of things as they happened. Instead of discovering them in pieces, decades later." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, Nathan. I know now. And I can't change the past. All I can do is try to be honest moving forward. Even if it's difficult." He exhaled sharply, a mixture of relief and lingering resentment. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted. "I love you, Mom. I do. But everything feels different. Fragile. I don't know if things can ever go back to how they were." Abram appeared then, hesitating in the doorway. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Nathan, I never wanted to hurt you or your family. I swear. But I also can't deny what's been, what we've shared." Nathan's gaze fixed on him, piercing and unflinching. "I don't need apologies right now. I need honesty, clarity, and time. You'll get the chance to explain, but I need Mom to speak first." The room fell silent, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on all of us. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and carried the scent of fallen leaves. The evening stretched long and uncertain. I realized that the holiday we had celebrated, filled with turkey, pie, and laughter, had transformed into a crucible of truth. Every choice, every secret, every long-concealed affection had converged here, forcing confrontation and reflection. I reached out, placing a tentative hand on Nathan's shoulder. "We'll face this together," I said softly. "Not all at once, not without struggle, but together. That's all I can promise." He nodded, though his eyes betrayed the storm still within him. "I'll try," he whispered. "I want to, Mom. I really do." And in that moment, I understood that the real Thanksgiving had begun, not with the meal or the gathering of family, but with the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. The difficult work of facing long-buried truths, and the cautious hope that, even after betrayal, a family could find its way forward. The night pressed on, silent save for the hum of the heater and the distant rustle of leaves, carrying with it the lingering taste of regret, the faint scent of forgiveness, and the awareness that nothing would ever be the same again. The dawn after Thanksgiving broke pale and hesitant, the sky a muted gray over Willowbend. I stood at the window, watching frost glimmer on the grass. The remnants of the holiday scattered across the yard, pumpkin seeds, stray napkins, a forgotten mitten. Silence had settled over the house, heavy and deliberate, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of what had transpired. Nathan had gone out early, leaving a note, "I'll be back later. We still have a lot to talk about." His absence was both a relief and a reminder that our confrontation was far from over. Abram lingered downstairs, his presence quiet and unobtrusive. William had retreated to his study, murmuring something about catching up on paperwork. Though I knew his thoughts were as restless as mine. Alone, I allowed myself to remember. To replay the choices that had led to this precarious moment, the stolen glances. Whispered letters, shared laughter in secret corners of the town. The delicate balancing act of love and guilt. The house seemed suspended in time. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of curtains magnifying the tension. I knew that when Nathan returned, he would demand clarity, full transparency. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of careful omission, could no longer remain obscured. And I feared that each revelation, each confession, might fracture the family beyond repair. When Nathan finally walked in, the light from the hallway catching his profile, I saw the man my son had become, resolute, perceptive, and unyielding. "Mom," he said, voice steady but carrying the weight of unshed emotion. "I need to know everything. No more half-truths, no more protective silences." I nodded, the lump in my throat making speech difficult. "You deserve that," I whispered. "And I'll tell you. All of it. The good, the bad, and the regret. Nothing hidden." Abram stepped closer, his eyes meeting mine briefly, silently affirming that he, too, would answer for his part. William remained in the study. His silence a reminder that not everyone in this story would forgive easily, if at all. Over the next hours, we sat together, voices low, hearts heavy. I recounted the affair, the exhilaration, the fear, the love, the guilt, while Nathan listened. Sometimes with tears, sometimes with quiet anger. Abram filled in where necessary, never overstepping, always careful. It was excruciating, intimate, and painfully real. By nightfall, no resolution had been reached, and perhaps none would ever be complete. But in the telling, a bridge had begun to form. Nathan, though hurt, had glimpsed the humanity behind my choices. I had faced the consequences I could no longer avoid. Abram had been acknowledged, neither vilified nor excused. Just accepted as part of the complex tapestry of our lives. As I stood by the window later, the moon casting a cold silver light across the yard, I understood that some truths are never simple. That forgiveness is neither immediate nor absolute, and that family, though altered, can endure the revelation of secrets. Thanksgiving had passed, leaving behind empty plates and lingering aromas, but also an indelible imprint of honesty, reckoning, and the fragile, enduring possibility of reconciliation. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, a confession half for the wind and half for the stars. We are broken, but perhaps not beyond repair. And with that, I realized that life, like the frost on the grass, would melt and shift with time, leaving traces of what had been, and hints of what could still be.